Hello, this is James St. James, and in this episode we're going to be talking about the fascia patterns of the body. Let's learn about the functional anatomy of the human body from a healer perspective so that we can reverse engineer intuitive healing so that we can re-engineer body and mind to think and perform how we want. In the last episode, we went over the sinew channels of the body, for each the positive and negative aspects for each of the 6 elements. However, that was just one layer of the fascia of the body. In fact, the fascia actually has many layers to it. Some deeper, some more surface level. But all of them are highly interconnected and play an important role in the overall mechanics of the body. Fortunately, despite there being many intricate layers of the fascia, to create effective strategies, we really only need to understand the major channels, as they're where most of the tension is held. Tension is the key force that holds all things in the body together. But when that tension becomes too great, it can even pull things together so tightly that it begins to squeeze or pinch structures such as blood vessels and organs, which can eventually lead to disease. By releasing tension in the major fascia channels, the interstitial fascia areas between them will automatically relax and release as well. Upon release, the tissues can have more flow of nutrients, blood, and other fluids so that they can operate better. Generally, the less tension in the body, the more likely it will be to be healthy, energetic, and clear-headed. So, it's important for us to learn about the fascia so that we can repair it, reduce the tension that we store, reduce our stress, and restore our bodies to working order. There are 2 sets of major fascia channels that carry most of the body's stress and tension and are what we are going to be focusing on when we do body work. One set of the major channels are the sinew channels that we went over in the previous episode. The other set is referred to as the spiral fascia bands. The spiral fascia bands are circular in nature and wrap all parts of the body, which give the body its ability to perform rather complex and sophisticated movements, while also sharing the burden of the joints to ensure that they don't twist to the point of injury. Here are the charts that display the spiral fascia bands. Notice that these fascia bands always wrap the body in spirals. Because of the nature of the spirals and the varying geometries of the body, the spirals will also wrap at different angles. Furthermore, as you'll see here, there are a number of tubes around the torso of the body at varying angles as well. Now, you're not expected to memorize all of these, as you will be able to download these charts, but just look at them and understand the general idea and how the body distributes the tension through these spiral-shaped fibrous channels. Understanding these patterns in the fascia is really important when tracing stress to the root issues of the body. Understanding these spiral bands in combination with the sinew channels will give us somewhat of a roadmap of the human body so that we can see where the symptoms or pains are showing up. And then using simple geometry techniques to figure out the likely areas where the damage is coming from. Because when it comes to beating stress, the damage is almost never where the most notable symptoms are showing up. If the damage is where the symptoms show up, then it is likely locked in tension at a remote location anyways, and the problem will not go away until that remote tension is released first. So this is why it is important to understand where and how these lines connect and to where they lead. Only through understanding the patterns can we trace effectively and resolve deeper health issues. The spiral fascia bands are one type of pattern that we are going to talk about in this episode. The other type, and for the purpose of identifying key stress points in the body, and the last worth mentioning for the purpose of healing, is what I refer to as stress lines. The force vectors are based on the mechanics of the human body and are how it handles the stress loads from daily or sports activities. One's force vectors will change based on their stress pattern, resulting in things like postural changes or habitual adjustment behaviors. These lines have correlations to, but are not the same as the sinew channels or the spiral bands, as they are purely vector-based, meaning they run along the most direct routes from one joint to the other. But at the same time, they don't have any physical form, meaning that if you were to open up a dead body, for example, in the science labs, they wouldn't be able to see these stress lines because they're only directional based on the forces in the body, but there's no actual structure, so they actually innervate through each structure. This is why they cannot be detected in any type of medical imaging equipment, and even for the best alternative healing practitioners can be very difficult to identify. They are just lines of tension that run mostly through the fascia. These lines of force denote the location where the fascia holds the most stress. Tension and compression forces move through the fascia in lines, causing the fibers along those lines to tighten, eventually to the point where they cripple and lock up, creating palpable lines of tension running through parts of the body in the web-like fascia. Despite the shocking reality that there is actually nothing in the medical or scientific literature about these stress lines, these lines are really important for many things regarding your health, such as nerve flow, posture, organ functionality, and overall mobility. The stress lines develop at a young age, but when we're young, they're really minor and don't carry a lot of stress or tension. Over time, they compound though, and eventually they can begin pulling with as much as 40 kilograms of force, which is a lot of force. In fact, that's enough force to collapse a vertebral disc, for example, or even, in some cases, tear apart organs slowly, or even crippling them, which can eventually lead to them failing and possibly cause death. So that's why these lines are really important to study and are a critical element of the healing process. To exemplify how important these lines are, if a line going through a critical area of the body, such as the heart, were to take on a severe amount of damage, it could lead to a wide variety of things like sexual health problems, insanity, or even death. Tragically, this actually happened to a good friend of mine where the stress around his heart and the line going through it actually caused the heart to rip and a hole to leak blood out, and he died. And so needless to say that the stress lines are worth talking about. And those stress lines are a pattern that exists mostly in the fascia. And from what I've seen, they exist in just about everybody to some degree. Moving on, let's take a look at the force vectors. Keep in mind that these points in the diagram are not exact and have no associated quantitative value, meaning that you need to investigate on your own or in the presence of a healer to determine the exact direction and force of the vectors in your own body. When the sinews meet with the wrapping fascia bands, then the point closest to the force vector will become damaged and tense, most likely, and often to the point where the nerves cannot even operate properly. These tender points on the body are what are referred to as trigger points. An interesting note about the trigger points, just like the force vectors, is that there is no actual physical point there. It's just a likely place that we accumulate damage to the fascia. In practice, not everyone's trigger points are in the same place, as for different people, they're going to have different trigger point sets because their stress pattern is different. And for an individual, the trigger points may actually move around during the healing process because the trigger points are created from the stress and tension, which we are releasing through the healing process. So as one moves through the healing process, that force and tension will change, and so the trigger points will move. So the trigger points are a good reference to know, and I would recommend looking them up, but their locations will become self-evident if you simply follow the tracing process with a basic understanding of the fascia patterns. We'll be covering the tracing process in a later episode of the season, so you're going to want to make sure to check that out as this video is preparing you for that episode. Trigger point therapy is just one healing practice that solely focuses on applying pressure to the critical intersection points of the fascia. Think of these more like doorways to the solutions that you'll discover and need, rather than the solutions themselves. Finding the doorway is not the same as opening and walking through the doorway. In another season, I will walk you through how to craft a strategy where you can enter through the trigger points and follow them all the way to the roots of the damage to eventually solve the problems that lie deep within. Yes, these charts are filled with information that you should know if you want to become your own personal anti-stress doctor, so they can heal yourself. Eventually, you may come to have all this information memorized, but don't let this information overwhelm you when it comes to just getting started. If you apply the methods of tracing, which we haven't gone over yet, correctly and appropriately, then all of this information will become self-evident when you get there. So you don't need to have all this information to get started. You just need to have a good grasp of the way that the fascia bands look and how they connect and how they work together. It's kind of like studying anatomy. After looking at the muscle charts for a while, just by putting your hand on a part of the body, you'll be able to feel the muscles in greater detail. You may not be able to recall the exact Latin names for each of the muscles, but it's okay. You don't need to know Latin to heal. You just need to know where the muscle or fascia band is, what it does, and what it's connected to in order to create techniques that work for you and resolve your health issues. So for now, just get a general image in your mind about how the fascial bands wrap and move through the body and where they connect. With these diagrams of the fascia, along with a basic understanding of the various muscles of the body and the major trigger points, you'll begin to see how to trace and where to apply your healing techniques. By applying the healing techniques in the other video in this series that we'll be covering later in a way that works with the fascia structure of the body, one will be able to understand and undo any type of stress-related damage and improve your mobility and overall well-being. In the next episode, we're going to go over the electrical channels of the body. Yes, these are super important, so if you watch this, then you are definitely not going to want to miss that. So, I'll see you over there. If you want to learn more about the body and mind, then feel free to check out the other videos in this channel or subscribe. And if you have a question about anything, then drop it in the comments and I'll do my best to answer it. I'll see you in the next video.